Well, thank you for coming. So what we're going to be doing for the next 3 weeks, we've been wanting to show some of our pictures from Israel, and while we took over, 6,600 pictures besides videos, we were going to bore you with a travel blog. See, I can't say it.
Travelogumentary.
Travelogumentary. I said it earlier today. But what we wanted to do was, since we're in this Lenten season, walk the steps of Jesus and show you the places he went and why he went there and why it was important. Anyway, so the first week we thought we would kind of start with his very first start of his ministry, and we looked at that last week, Sunday, with the baptism, and then he did the temptations, he went off into the wilderness, and then he went to Capernaum and Galilee. So that's where we're going to start. The first one is
Yardenette. And so this is one of the possible sites, and this is where you can go and be baptized in the Jordan River today. And it's very beautiful, it's lush. I was baptized there, rebaptized in the Jordan River, because how can you not take that opportunity and do it if you were there? And then Penny.
Yeah, this is Dory, she's one of them. She's one of the 27 that I got to be a part of rededicating their baptisms. We had a couple that were baptized for the first time, but there were some that had rededicated it. And it was cold, but it was not near as cold as when I went over 4 years ago. It was cold.
Behind you, is that the Jordan River?
That is the Jordan River. So as the Sea of Galilee comes down, this is the southern part as it goes back to the Jordan on its way to the Dead Sea. It's cleaner, I know it looks green, but it actually was pretty clear.
It's pretty clear, yeah.
You could see straight down and see your feet, but it's a little warmer here than it is coming out of Mount Hermon, where the snow is, coming into the Sea of Galilee from the north.
Which is what that looks like. Now that picture is very pretty, but it does not look that pretty now, which is why they don't baptize people there now, because you probably wouldn't want to get in the water.
But as you see here, it really snakes along. It's not just like a straight shot down into the sea and a straight shot down to the Dead Sea. And there's a lot of places where it is so narrow you could literally hop across it. It's really weird how it's changed and grown up. Now they said this is not what it looked like 2,000 years ago. It was really wide. They're sucking some of the water out for farming, because a lot of the desert areas that need water, they've learned how to take some from the Dead Sea and desalinize it. And so it's not the salt contents. It's like they figured out a 50-50 mix. It's half salt water, half fresh water from the Jordan. They can grow dates, palm trees, figs. Yeah, there's a lot of different produce that they can grow in the desert. So you would never have seen this probably 2,000 years ago, but now there's all this vegetation. But why do we bring this up? Because in some of the scriptures, people assume that Jesus was baptized in the southern part because that's where we go to get baptized. And in actuality, they believe that Jesus was actually baptized on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. Why does this make a difference? Because when he was done being baptized, he was filled with the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
Talk on that?
Sure. I was really struck by that this last week, and I just keep thinking about it and praying on it. So prior to this point, prior to being baptized, no one had the Holy Spirit on earth. That was the first time, and Jesus was the first one to be baptized and to receive the Holy Spirit. And it was after that he started his ministry, that he was able to do all of the things. For the most part, there's not a lot of record in any scripture that he did anything prior to that. But I just thought it was fascinating because, fully human and fully divine, so he could have done those things, but it's almost as if he waited until he had the Spirit.
He limited himself in human form,
and that's
we see the Spirit.
Right, which just...
It's mind-blowing.
Blew my mind, because they're one and the same, but I just thought that was amazing that he started that, because then that, as far as gifts of the Spirit, that's where it comes from for all of us, and that's where it came from for him too, so he got to experience fully what that was like, and I thought that was pretty cool.
So then it says he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Now, if he was baptized on the southern part, like we showed you, the wilderness to the south of that is Qumran. And that's kind of what this looks like. If Qumran sounds familiar, that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. But Qumran was popular way back when because that's where the group called the Essenes, they were a priestly tribe, and they resided out in the wilderness here, and they had a whole village kind of thing. I mean, what they've excavated now is unreal. But it is this cave right here that the shepherd boy threw a rock in to scare his sheep out, and he hit something and heard it shatter. This was in 1947. 9 months later is when Israel became a nation. I want you to think about that. These scrolls have been hidden for 2,000 years. And when the shepherd boy shattered that pot, you can almost say it was a shot heard around the world.
That's right.
That everything set into motion. And I found not just some of those Dead Sea Scrolls, but we got to see an entire book of Isaiah that has been preserved in the museum. That was phenomenal.
It was. So many.
Word for word.
Yeah. So many of the books or the scrolls that our Bible is taken from come from places like that. And some of it was confirmed, and they have more, and it's just amazing to see. We did get to see quite a few.
Stuff that's 2,000 years old.
How far is this from Jerusalem?
It would be actually north. Well, Qumran is south of Jerusalem, but Galilee is north, so Jerusalem's off to the west.
Oh.
If you look, I should have had a map up, that would have been easier to see.
And visualize.
Yeah, because people think of Nazareth being off this way, but Nazareth is actually west of the Sea of Galilee, which kind of has you turn around. But there, too, you have to realize everything's hills. So when they had to go to Bethlehem, Mary and Joseph, it's 80 miles, but 80 miles of
Hills.
Mountains and hills, even though it looks like the way the crow flies, it's not that far, but it's...
The way a donkey walks, it would have been quite far.
Yeah.
Well, and so Qumran is very close to the Dead Sea. You can see the Dead Sea from Qumran, so it's down at that southern.
And if you've heard of Masada, that was the big last stand with the Jews. The Romans came in. And that was actually one of Herod's palaces, and so Masada is not too far south of Qumran, and it's just east of the Dead Sea, or west. I keep saying east, west of the Dead Sea. So they had a lot of ritual baths. So this was a priestly group, and that's what they did. So when John was baptizing, we think like that was something new. Actually, they were baptized all the time, but when they called it baptism, it was for purification. So before you could do anything, before you could go into the temple, before you could go in the synagogue, you needed to be purified. And if you had had a cut, or if it was a woman and it was past your monthly time, you had to go through the mikvahs, which were these ritual baths. And you would go down into the water, and then you would come up, and you were clean. And of course, that lasted until basically you came back up.
Right.
Now, in Hebron, when we were there, they actually had mikvahs that had a whole set of steps going down and another set coming up, so that way you could have people going, but you did not touch. Because if you touched somebody, when you came up that was going down, you'd be unclean. You had to go again.
But it was cool to see the actual history of where baptism came from. I mean, I know for me, I thought that was such a Christian practice, but it has its roots in Jewish culture. They just had to do it all the time, where now it's one and done.
Right. So when Jesus went to John the Baptist to be baptized, it was repent of your sins. But when Jesus went, it was just for the act show, and that's when John said, "Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world." So that's when he shifts it. Now this was, they had, it's a side picture, but this was an aqueduct. They had everything all set up for water. I mean, you're in the desert. And so they had water going down to all these mikvahs, which was really interesting how that worked. These are just some of the pictures there of Qumran. This was another aqueduct. And they actually had the water heated. They had ways of starting a fire in these areas.
Got the picture.
Yeah, I guess there's a picture there. Multiple places, so they could get the water
Warm, at least.
Yeah, hot. But they excavated, so over here really basically is the Dead Sea. And they have excavated so much of this. Why is this important? Okay, because John the Baptist, he was, for the priestly line, he was Zechariah's son. But he did not follow his father's footsteps and become a priest at the temple. But he was still the priestly line. there are a lot of scholars and a lot of research is done that says there's a very good chance that John the Baptist went to the Essenes. His parents were almost 100 when he was born. He would have died shortly after, and that the Essenes had raised him, and he was still in that priestly line.
But that also talks about when he was like a man in the wilderness, he was preaching in the wilderness. Well, this would have been considered the wilderness. So the language matches up, and a lot of the food he talked about eating and some of that would have been something that was common for them.
There are little clues in the scriptures when it said he ate honey and wild locusts. Or locusts and wild honey, one of the two. You didn't eat locusts, but there was one exception, and it's found in the Essenes manual, basically, for living, that if you were to eat locusts, how you were supposed to eat it. And they have a street in here that's called Straight Street. If you remember Paul, when he was blinded, he was told to go to Simeon, the tanner, on Straight Street. This has also been referred to as Damascus. So there's Damascus, which is clear up in Turkey, but then there was a Damascus in Israel back when, which makes a little more sense. When Paul was on the road to Damascus, why would he be going to Turkey? Because they had no jurisdiction there. He was a Roman. But people were hiding out. Okay, so that's why I bring this up, because this could have been a place where Jesus could have been baptized and gone to the wilderness. But also, if he had been baptized above the Sea of Galilee, that's called now, they said, that's been called the wilderness, which is around Golan Heights and
until then, Mount Hermon.
So, just thought these were some really cool pictures. How much they have, just since I was there 4 years ago, they have excavated so much more of this area. In fact, they were taking drone footage and doing a documentary while we were there. Now, this is from 4 years ago, because I went to the southern part of the Dead Sea. We went to the northern part, and it was not near as much fun. It was nasty. The water's way down, and ragged, jagged rocks, and it was impossible to get into it and out of it.
It was dicey.
And when I went, it was so stinking cold, you weren't going to go in it. But these were a couple people from London, England, and they wanted to swim in the Dead Sea. You can't swim. You just float.
Because it's such dense water from the salt.
And that's actually the salt residue. So I just kind of dug up some and put it in a baggie and brought it home. So actually, here is where all of your essential minerals and
from the Dead Sea.
Very, very pricey, expensive. They have all sorts of factories around there that they are mining this and then selling it. So then Jesus, after he went to the wilderness and was tempted, it said he started his ministry. And where did he start it? He started at Capernaum. Where is Capernaum? It's on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. Again, another reason. If Jesus had been baptized on the north and he went off in the wilderness there, he would have come back to that northern shore. It makes a lot more sense than down here and trying to make that big long trek.
Right.
But who was the home of Capernaum?
So Capernaum was home of Simon Peter and Andrew and James and John. And so this is where he started calling his disciples, and that's where they were from.
So if you've watched any of The Chosen, most of that ministry of Jesus was in Capernaum, and that's where he had really kind of settled. This wasn't all that small, but it was a fishing town, kind of, mostly. But the Romans had come in, and they had headquartered as well. This is actually, I love this place, because it's one of the oldest synagogues still standing. But it is not the synagogue that Jesus would have actually stood in, and I didn't know that until this time. So this is from after Jesus, well, about 70 AD, they said?
Yes.
So
which still is, gives it 2,000 years
right
old.
here is the original. So they have excavated down to that. That would have been where Jesus would have walked. And that would have been the original synagogue that he would have preached at, he would have taught at. It's just really cool.
And it was just amazing to see that, I mean, and you've got some more pictures, so much excavated here. Mm-hmm. All of these.
These are all homes. So when we talked about, like the parents would have a home, and then the homes were not just this little thing. I mean, it would be pretty big. So then the son would go and he would build a second story onto that, and then he would bring home his bride. So these are all different homes.
And
Different rooms.
the ruins are all layered because, so if it was sacred ground, so like there was a synagogue on there, and then they would come and they would, oh, well, this was a good religious site, so we're going to build a church on top of it. Oh, we're going to come in and build a mosque on top of it. You know, so like there's layers of religious buildings, and it's all considered holy ground, but depending on who controlled it at the time, that's where you'll hear a lot of tells over there, is just layers.
Well, this is actually a Catholic church. And this is the latest one, because underneath that is the house, the home of Peter. And so through the years, here we go. So the center is really where the home of Peter is at. And they had built a structure around that to preserve it. And then that went, by the way, they built another structure around that. Then they built this one around that. And then they built this great big monstrosity. So there's always, that's what she's getting at, there's always been a church over it protecting that house. That is the home where Jesus came and healed Peter's mother-in-law. That he had many meals there, so you could see through there under the building. And this is the first time I did not get to go into the church. This time we did. And they have glass on the floor, and you can look straight down into where the ruins of the home. So
I just thought, like, that, to me, that was just amazing to think. Like, he would have sat there and dined with his disciples and just been just a normal guy. Yeah, that just blew my mind. That was really neat to see.
So here's a few more of the ruins behind that synagogue. It's just phenomenal what they've been able to dig up. And,
Could you walk through there?
We didn't. We just didn't have time.
But you could.
You could have, yeah.
There were some that we did, but not those.
Magdala, we did.
Yeah, we did go. We got to walk through Magdala.
So this would be the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee. This is a yucca plant. I mean, the plants over there just huge, massive. So that is looking at the Sea of Galilee if you were to look like south. Now it's called a sea, but it's really a lake. And to be honest, it's not even that big of a lake. What did they say it was? 8 miles?
Maybe, yeah, maybe
7 or 8 miles or 7? Yeah, you said. Yeah, it's like only 4 miles wide or something, and 8 miles long. I mean, when you think about the lakes that we have here in America, they're way bigger than that, but yet it's called a sea. Yeah. Okay, so this is just the side of that synagogue, and they had some of the ruins that they had excavated, and then you can see this is there's Roman on both sides of the pillars, and don't ask me because I don't speak Roman. I don't speak Roman, I don't know what it says. This is a statue of Peter as a fisherman, because this whole town has been his claim to fame, basically.
St. Peter.
Yeah. So then we looked, okay, so after Jesus was done collecting his, and I didn't have a picture up here, but the first time I went, we got to go by a little church, and it's an alcove, and that's where he actually called the disciples. And you could just feel it. It was the only place where you could really bring boats in and out. So if you think of the northern part, you just kind of come down just a little bit, this dip. And, that was just, that was surreal. And I wish so much we could have stopped. I kept begging him to let us stop there, and we didn't get to. But, I didn't get the picture. So then Jesus would have gone back to Nazareth, and they have the Nazareth village. So it's really interesting that you have this big hustle bustle city booming with all these,
modern conveniences and hotels and cars and stoplights and everything.
And then there's this big area that has been preserved and saved just like it would have been back then. And so they have people, and the whole thing's kind of a mock village, but it's some of the stuff they've excavated, what it would have looked like. This is what a family tomb would have looked like.
Now, were you talking about Nazareth?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So Jesus would have gone from Capernaum back to Nazareth to see his family, see his mom, and there's a pivotal thing that happens when he goes to Nazareth, so we'll get to that. So this is vineyards and cabbage, and they had all sorts of vegetation, and I love this because we don't think of a vineyard like this. It was all hanging trellises for the grapes.
Yeah, you can see it better there.
Yeah. And then inside, has anybody seen The Chosen yet this season? That's been in the movies? Okay. Yeah. So, we saw this first, but they actually did an awesome job with this. So when they would do the olives, they would take the olives and they would put it inside, they would put it inside here. And then they would roll this stone on it and it would smash the olives, okay? And then they would take all that smashed olives and they would put it in these little things, these baskets. These baskets are round with a hole, so they're like an accordion. They like open up and you put the olives around the edges, okay, this mash.
So but that first pressing that was like the Adonai, that was God's pressing. It was the most pure, so like your extra virgin olive oil.
So they would take all those and put them right here. You can see it. They would, or over here you can see it. They would stack them. And they had this big stone on top, and then these are weights. So they would put
the
a
first
little bit
pressing
of weight, and it would press that down.
And that was your purest, and that was used for sacrifice. And
that was used in the temple and the synagogues, and that was the best of the best back to God. Then they would put more weight on, and they would press it again. That was your extra virgin, and that was what they would use for cooking and for, it was your,
I forgot the lamp.
Oh, yeah, okay. They would use it for, edible stuff. It was still your really good, expensive oil. And then they would put a third one on, and they would press it, there you can see it again, yet again, and smash it even more to get the last drop of oil out they could. And that's what they used for cleaning, or for the little lamps that they would light, to, all that kind of stuff. Then they would take the mash, and they would clean out that mash, and they would save it and use it for fire starter, because there was just enough oil left in it that it would ignite. Why this is so pivotal? Jesus says to his disciples, and I think this might have been on the Mount of Olives, when he's talking about his heart was crushing. It was like the pressing. He talks about the pressing 3 times. And when Jesus was going up to pray that Thursday night, he asked the disciples to stay with him, to stay awake, and he went and he prayed. That was the first pressing. And he comes back, and they didn't stay awake, and he goes back and he prays again. That was the second pressing. He's so emotional. They still don't stay awake. He goes back the 3rd time, and it says it was like he sweated blood. It was the 3rd. It was that final crushing to where there was nothing left. The Chosen did an awesome job with this in the last episode. They did. But it was just really cool because it's like, oh my gosh, we saw that. That was neat. So then here's a gentleman who's doing pottery. I was in hope Pat was going to be here because she could see it. So she does pottery. And that's the kiln that they would go into, because you have to realize everything was pottery, and so they had a big one. So they would take a whole bunch in at a time. And it's mind-blowing how much of the pottery they found that wasn't even cracked. We went to Shiloh.
Oh my goodness.
We're talking 4,000 years, 5,000 years
old, big, huge vats that held water.
Yes, not cracked.
Not even a crack. And it's
broken.
How did that?
And under all that rock and excavated. Mind-blowing. And then they had a carpenter, and he had the different tools. Well, in this particular one, he had the thing how he was hollowing out a log, and right here they were making the scroll holders. So that's what you would roll a scroll on.
Yeah, I'll hold it and then read it.
This one's a pitchfork. And this thing here, I was thinking it was like an aerator or something. They put
I think you're right, maybe like they put rocks on it and pulled it behind and it kind of...
For the garden or whatever, it was kind of like a harrow. Yeah, I think that's what they used it for, it was like a harrow.
Yeah.
But he also had then like your hand tools, and he had the chisels, and then he had one that was a stick on a string. And he pulled the string, and it was a drill bit. All hand tools, that was cool.
That was neat. And they used all of them. They're making stuff there all the time. That was neat. There's some of the pottery. And you can see like the little lamps. Yeah, those little things are their oil lamps. That is not what I pictured when I saw it before I went. I guess I don't think I knew what they looked like, but it wasn't that.
Here we have them at nighttime. They had little lamps. They had homes that you could go in, and then this lady was doing the wool. And They even had the dark colors because that was so expensive. So purple, white purple was so rich and so expensive. It came from a snail, only in one part of a sea. And it was extremely expensive, and you would squeeze that snail, and the dye from it made this purple color. So it was exorbitantly expensive to come by either the snails to do it, or to come by the purple
dye,
well, the purple material. So when you got it, you dyed everything in color. I mean, it wasn't just a little bit, throw it away by any means. And they had a loom. Oops, sorry, that was really cool.
I feel fine.
Now this is what's so neat, and this is where we're getting at with Jesus. This is what a synagogue would have looked like. The Chosen has almost the exact same replica, even like the old dude that's sitting there, gave it the flavor.
But in Nazareth, you would have gone and read from Isaiah, and that was kind of a pivotal moment, and the moment when, do you have that?
Yeah, I did. I had it. I had it to pull up. Well, I had it. Just here.
61.
Go ahead. Talk.
So, I mean, when they talk about a prophet is not listened to or welcomed in his own town, Jesus was no exception. So they invited him to do the reading that night. He was a rabbi, he was a teacher, so he did the reading, and he read from Isaiah.
Kept the Torah in these jars,
which would have been similar to what they would have been sitting in, probably in those caves in Qumran.
So here's the wood that the scrolls were rolled up on. And so Jesus stands up and he selects Isaiah 61. He says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord, Adonai, is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and to release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn." And then, instead of going on, because there's the whole rest of the passage, he rolls back up the scroll and he says, "Today the prophecy has been fulfilled," and he sits down.
Well, he was really claiming for the first time publicly in a
The year of the Lord, meaning the Messiah had come. This is the first time that he is calling himself the Messiah. And they did not like it, and so they
asked him,
marched him out of town, and they marched him up to Mount Precipice, which is just like, so you had to go down. It wasn't just right there. I mean, you're in town, you have to go clear down, and then you have to go up Mount Precipice, and you're on top. And that's how far it is. That's where they pushed people off for heresy and for not taking back what he had said, that he was.
Yeah, because they gave him the opportunity, take it back, or we'll have to, I mean, that's how they did it.
Invoke the law of Moses.
The law of Moses, which would have been to throw him off this.
And in the Chosen, Jesus looks at him and he says, "I am the law of Moses." Cool line.
It is. It's not biblical, but it's really cool.
But here's the view from on top of the mountain. You can see 75 miles away.
So it was not something that anyone would have survived,
Right.
had they.
And this is behind, so as you can see, that's all Nazareth. I mean, it's a ways. I mean, so he really would have started somewhere right about there. So I mean, it was a long walk all the way up to this mountain.
And then depending on which gospel you read,
This would have been the first miracle because he just vanished. Because they tried to push him off.
They didn't push him off there.
That's right.
It was not yet time.
So he leaves Nazareth never to return. He does not go back because he's not welcome there to kill him there if he does. So he goes back to Capernaum. Well, he hits several of the villages around, but he goes back to Capernaum, back to Sea of Galilee. And this is the fishing boat that they found.
And they found this on the floor of the Sea of Galilee and could tell, I mean, when it was underwater, it was still preserved. And from dating, this would have been a fishing boat in the time of Jesus.
This is 2,000 years old.
And they knew this was just so cool, they knew if they brought it up to the air, it would disintegrate and be destroyed. So they came up with this amazing idea, and they took like spray foam, and they literally like spray foamed the whole thing, and then floated it up and floated it down and then got it into this museum where they could preserve it.
Take
But-
it off
And
Preserve
show
the
it like
trees.
this. But to think, like, right there.
That's what that gal said. She's like, well, how are we gonna get it to the ship to pick it up? And she said, well, I guess we'll have to float it down the sea. And so she sat on top of this block of foam with this inside, realizing the weight that it had been 2,000 years since that boat. So it's called the Jesus boat.
Yeah.
Had been floated down the sea. And there's a whole museum there that's really cool. And that's expanded. I mean, when I was there 4 years ago, they didn't even have that entire edition. There's so much there to see now. It was mind-blowing. But this is the Sea of Galilee. And we got some of the mosaic that they've uncovered from around the area. That would be a fishing boat. And this is really cool because while we were there waiting to get on our boat, there was a couple who got married on the Sea of Galilee in the boat. That was fun.
It was cool to see.
As I said, you can see, it's not that, maybe it's 3 miles wide. It's really not that wide across. But as we were in it, so first time I went, we went from the north down to Tiberias. So we went almost the whole lake. This time we just went out to the middle and stopped and then turned around. But when we stopped, was probably, they said, about the same spot that Jesus walked on water with Peter.
Where he calmed the storm both times.
And if you look at, this is just some of the hillside, but that's Decapolis over there. So when we talk about, so Jesus goes halfway, and he told the disciples to get in the boat. He said, I'll catch up to you. And they weren't supposed to go past halfway because it's 80 feet deep and they believed there were sea monsters there. You just didn't go the other way.
And there was nothing good on the other
No,
side
because
because that was 10 cities, well, the beginning of the 10 cities that were all pagan cities. No good Jew would be caught dead over there.
That's where the prodigal son had gone around Capernaum to Decapolis. So when Jesus gets there, and that's where he calmed the storm the first time, that's where then the second time he shows up in the storm. Peter walks to him and he calms it. And then they finish going across to Decapolis, and what should wait for him but the demoniac, the one that was possessed with the legion of demons. And that's a little different too, because, you know, I always thought that the way the scripture sounds like it was a hill and the pigs just ran off and fell in the water. No, they're like half a mile. Now they're a mile from the water, but back then probably half a mile from the water. So the pigs had to run all the way down and keep running, which pigs don't run. They don't run that far. They'll die of a heart attack when they go half a mile into the water and drown. And there's actually a church that was there to preserve that. And that's really cool because there's a lot of ruins of that church still out there today. So you can kind of get an idea what it would have been like when the disciples were starting to go across and the storm starts coming in. And you say, well, it's just a lake, you know, how could you have these storms? These storms that come out of nowhere because of the way it's channeled in between the mountains, it gets this
Like a wind tunnel almost, yeah.
And they can have 20-foot waves. I mean, it gets serious. And when that comes through, you don't have hardly any forward notice. So to try to get out of there is almost impossible.
Yeah, and it's not like they had a motor. They were.
And
it was
you can
manpower.
go past half because
Right, that way you can get back the other half quickly.
yeah. So that would be, and it's interesting how on the side of the Jewish side, there's people. I mean, there's houses, there's hotels, there's vegetation, and on the Decapolis side, barren.
Even to this day.
It's just barren, nothing over there. Not one hotel, not one house, not grass, nothing. It's on the other side of the sea. So then if you go towards then that northern part, kind of back around, you come to the town of Magdala. Why is Magdala important? Many reasons. You probably know a gal by the name of
Mary of Magdalene. Well, that wasn't her last name. Mary Magdalene was Mary from Magdala. That was where she came from, and that's why we call her that.
And they found out that this town was way bigger than they ever thought. And this is so, well, originally it was special because this was the most preserved synagogue before. Now this little thing is where they would sit up and where they would read the scroll from.
And it's still intact. The fact that when they found that was huge. That was a big deal. It's beautiful.
And then you can see the mosaic. It's the most preserved mosaic of anywhere around. This dates back 3,000 years.
But in a town would have only had one synagogue. I mean, that was all that was needed.
If you were lucky to
Right.
even have one synagogue. So why this is, and they've excavated so much of this town, again, all these houses. Why this is so important is because now they've discovered 3 synagogues, which is totally unheard of. And they don't know why this town had 3 synagogues. So this is just more. Now this was stuff that I had seen. They'd excavated a little more about 4 years ago. Since then, this entire area is new on the other side. And over here is where we found more mosaics. And guess what's in the middle here? That's a really bad picture, but it's a swastika.
Because that was actually a very religious symbol.
It was a Jewish symbol.
Taken by the Nazis. But, yeah.
Hitler used it against the Jews.
Yeah.
Admit this. Lots of ritual baths.
The water probably wouldn't have been that color
Yeah.
back then.
Well, it might have, because the copper.
That's true.
If there was copper in the
There's
ground.
copper in the ground.
But this was just so neat, because like I said, it was unreal. As we get into the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at like the city, the palace of David. The stuff that they've excavated in just 4 years. I mean, like in another part of the entire city. It's just like, wow.
And there's a law in Israel that before you build anything or whatever, you have to look for ruins, and if you find them, then that has to be preserved. So that's why they're constantly finding more and more. It's not like, oh, they found all this, 1,000 years ago, and we've all just get to look at it. No, some of this is brand new. It's pretty amazing. And the amount that has been uncovered in the last 100 years has been.
Just even what's been uncovered in the last 10, 5 to 10. So this right here then would have been that one shot that was across. This was one of the synagogues. There's another one that was up over to the side.
So just starting to find,
to excavate. So that's going to be really exciting. That was us at the end of that part.
Yeah.
And the gentleman behind there, Philip, he's from Oklahoma, and he was actually on our podcast 3 and 4, or 2 and 3, when we did the dinosaurs. So, but yeah, that's the first part. So this would have been the steps that Jesus would have walked. I mean, that's where he met Mary. That's where he removed the demons from her. That's where he healed so much of the people around Capernaum. And there again, those mikvahs, that was so important, because if you had leprosy or you had anything and you were healed, the first thing you had to do was go and present yourself to the priest to show that you were healed. And then you had to go and cleanse yourself. You had to do the ritual cleansing. Well, they had camps of people that had leprosy that were like, what do we say? I mean, it was like 1/8 of a mile outside of town. It couldn't even be close. Nobody could even go there. And here Jesus is going to the least of these. He's going to all those that nobody could touch, nobody could be around. They were considered unclean. They didn't meet the 600 and, what did I say,
621 little bit
laws that were over that the Pharisees had added on. So it's just neat to be able to walk through that. If we were supposed to get to go back over the spring, and doing that, we were going to go to the place where they think Jesus was baptized. Right now, it's all kind of, it's real barren. It's not a site yet, but
we know people.
We know people.
We could have gone and seen that.
But just try to envision this stuff. When Jesus is talking about these parables of the sheep, and you're right there, and you see the sheep. And then the sheep gate. And then he's talking about the prodigal son, and you can just envision this now. It's like it wasn't that far,
He just went around the corner of the lake.
Around the lake, and it was Las Vegas.
Yeah. That's kind of what it was.
But how you could see then the clash of the Jews and the Gentiles, how the Gentiles were already coming in and with their pagan gods and their pagan practices and their pagan sacrifices, because then just up from Decapolis, we're getting into next week, is Benias, the gates of hell, and the Golan Heights. And right now, that's what's in the news. That's what everybody's fighting. I mean, they've been fighting over the Golan Heights since the 6-Day War. That was what, in the 70s, I think, or something, I don't know. But even right now, so when we went to, well, we'll get into that next week, but when we were right up there, that's, the day later is when Lebanon fired a missile. If we'd been just one day later, we wouldn't have gotten to go. And where we were down in Hebron,
One day
we
later.
were walking against the fence of Palestine, and they started doing stuff. One day, we wouldn't have been able to go there. Everything was just like 1 or 2 days. God was so good.
He was.
But, I mean, when we were there, we felt perfectly safe. I mean, it was, the stuff just kind of happened afterwards. So. Anyway, so this is the exciting thing. We're looking at Jesus, and why did he go these places? And why was his home? And why was he man to serve man, to save man? So, thanks for coming.
You should have a handout
I should.
that has a map on it. And
I know, I
all
need to.
these,
Yeah. I
it's
will
so
do that
hard
next
to,
Visual.
I've studied the map of Israel to try to familiarize myself with the larger town.
Uh-huh. I will.
Yeah.
I was literally putting this together right before I didn't have time. So yes.
But yeah, we'll do a map.
We have lots of maps. We have the ancient maps, we have the
Current
Jesus
day.
map and the current map. And I never still got it. They always said you think of Israel as a shoulder and what's at the top and what's at the elbow. I mean an arm and then a
I
hand.
have no idea. Never heard that.
Our tour guide was always talking about that.
Oh, when you went the first time?
No, even
Cootie?
Goody was talking about it this time. It was always in reference, if you think of it as an arm, and I could never visualize that. But Cootie, and Gotti, they're both serving, and Aaron Lipkin, who we went on Lipkin tours, he is serving. This is, that was 100 days, a week ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Aaron, what did he say?
He's
He was
49,
and he was
54.
activated to go and serve. So thankfully, he's being able to serve close to his hometown, just providing security. But the other ones were activated. Now, Cootie, I think, had been in the military before.
Well, they had, and Gotti
Yeah.
had been. And that was, it was interesting, because when I went 4 years ago, Gotti was all about military, and so we went to Masada, that was his thing, and everything, and when we went to the Golan Heights, where the 6-day war was, and where Lebanon had come in, and he was all full of that kind of stuff. And Cootie was more, he was not a Messianic Jew. There was 2 of the bus drivers, or the tour guides were. He wasn't, but he was so knowledgeable.
Oh, he was.
Of just even everything with Christian and Jesus and
And he would say, and you would say, and we would say, like kind of, this is your perspective and this is kind of what we think, but it was very interesting.
Why Aaron Lipkin was so crucial with this is he's the one that when they found 2 things. He found the footsteps of God, which is the thing. This is going back to Jacob's time, and we're not probably going to have time to show that in this one, but they actually made like a footprint. And that's where the priests would walk around, and so before they had a temple, this is when they were still, this was before Shiloh, when they were just
kind of nomadic.
I mean, yeah, this is way, way before all of that. This was before Moses, and everywhere they were at, there was this footprint. Well, they have now found, 7 footprints, and even Jerusalem is in the shape of a footprint.
So they talk about it being the footprints of God, but yeah, Aaron Lipkin was one of the ones that helped identify that.
And then Mount Ebal, which is Joshua's altar, and that's been in the news. If you've been paying any attention, they have excavated, actually had Joshua's altar. This is huge, because this is when Joshua comes into the promised land, and he builds the altar right there, and this is the undeniable proof
that
the
biblical and Jewish history,
all of it
actually happened.
And the Arabs came in and tried bulldozing. They were stealing rocks, and they were trying to bulldoze down walls, and they finally got them to stop, but they're trying to make it, if they can make it into a historical site by the country, then they can't touch it.
But they've had people there protecting it, I think, volunteers, and But that's the one place we didn't get to go.
We were supposed to, and that's when the protests were going, and we couldn't get escort.
Yeah, we needed an armed escort to go over there.
We were in an armed bus while we were there, but in the process, we didn't get to go to Mount Ebal, but we did get to go to Mount
Mount Kabir and
Mount Kabir and
the other one.
Yeah, we were looking down over Samaria, and that's where we saw Jacob's well, and we saw Joseph's tomb, and Jacob's well was where Jesus met the woman at the well. And they're like, just like what, blocks apart.
Yeah,
It's
but
not
you don't
what you
think
would
of
think.
that, yeah.
But we're talking how many years, 3,000 years difference. It's like,
Who does all this excavation work? Is it universities?
A lot of people want to be a part
A
of
lot of
that.
people from around the world go over there and do this. I know especially Shiloh, they have people from
There's
England.
got to be an organization that is
I would imagine
kind
the
of in
nation of Israel
charge.
probably.
Yes, Israel has got several groups that are in charge of the whole overarching, but who actually does all of the stuff. They can't man all of it, so they bring in people to help volunteer. In fact, you can do that. You can sign up to go over for a year and just volunteer to brush dirt and fun stuff.
It'd be so cool. Maybe a year would be a bit long. 3 months?
But that was so cool at Shiloh, we showed that video, and just since we had been there, what they had just excavated, I mean, we're talking, that was the original place of the Holy of Holies when we were in the tent, in the tabernacle. I mean, it just,
And that was within just a few months of
Yeah.
us being there, they discovered that.
it's mind-blowing.
We could talk about it forever.
I know, but it's so hard to understand, because we come from a country that's a few hundred years old, I mean, the country's not, we are. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff here, but maybe if you go excavate, what are you gonna find?
Yeah.
Not a whole lot, we're over there, it's just,
Oh, well, I remember I'm not going to be able to remember what town we were in, but there was 2 walls that were kind of like a path or whatever, and one side literally they said was like 6,000 years old. Those rocks were like 6,000.
oh, that was in
Was that Hebron?
Mhm. It was Noah's time.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Like they said it would have been during, and I was like,
We had to kind of go through our hand through the fence, and I was like, touch it.
I just touched rocks that were around when Noah was here.
I mean, when you really think about it, the whole world, you got far enough to touch
Oh,
rock.
shush.
But it was
But it
just
was amazing to
that they
think that it was there.
excavated down that far. But Hebron, why is this important? Because that's where the patriarchs are buried. We were like this close from getting to go where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac
Where they're
buried.
buried there. It's pretty amazing.
It's just right there. But why we didn't get to see it, it's now there's a military compound, and it's divided into 2. Jewish on one side, Israel on one side, Arab on the other side.
The entrance to the tomb, unfortunately, is on the Arab side. So they don't allow Jews.
They just, in the last year, decided that they're not going to let people.
So is that in the North Bank era?
No,
Area?
It's southern. No, southern, way southern. So if you think of Gaza, the Gaza Strip.
Or, I'm sorry, the West Bank.
Yeah, no, the West Bank's over here, which I never stood because it's on the east side.
It is.
It's confusing. If you think about the Gaza Strip, and you kind of go from the bottom of that strip and you go over towards the middle, kind of right there is Hebron.
If you look at it, it's Hebron is how it's spelled, but it's said Hebron.
Yeah, we say Hebron, but Israelis with a B. Yeah, so it's just, well, and a lot of pictures we took with all these kids are kids.
Oh, yeah, the soldiers.
Military, and then here they are, we're going, 6 months later, and they're fighting.
Because when you graduate from high school, everybody has to serve for 2 years.
Mhm.
It's
Both men and
required.
women.
You have to
Yeah,
serve for
choice.
2 years in the military.
And that's why they can call you up then. But the people that we saw in this particular compound, they actually were not Jewish. They were people of other nationalities that, because their parents were living in Israel, they wanted to then fight for Israel, go into the military. And so that's what this place was. It was
They were teaching them
schooling,
Jewish,
teaching
Jewish culture and
yeah, but they were all walking around with all these girls with ponytails and curls, and they're walking around with AKs on them, strapped like Rainbow, and it was just
such contrast.
yeah.
A contrast everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The old ruins in the middle of, like we said, I mean, Nazareth Village was a perfect example of modern day versus 2,000, 3,000 years ago, just coexisting in the same place. It was pretty neat.